My doctor smiled nervously, and I knew it wasn't the kind of smile you give out of joy or politeness. It was the kind that tries to hide something, the kind that trembles at the corners, a little too careful, a little too controlled. I remember that moment so vividly, the soft hum of the fluorescent light above, the faint scent of antiseptic mixed with something like old coffee, and the sound of my heartbeat in my ears that I had been waiting for 15 minutes, maybe more, in that small, sterile room. The kind of room that always feels colder than it should, even when you're wearing your thickest sweater. I kept my hands folded in my lap, rubbing my thumbs together, an old habit from when I was a child trying to stay calm in scary moments. When he finally came in, his usual confidence was missing. Dr. Allen, I'd been seeing him for years. He had that rare combination of calm professionalism and quiet kindness. The kind of man who remembered details, who noticed when something was off before you even said a word. But that morning, he seemed hesitant. "Good morning, Sarah," he said, glancing down at my file before looking up. His tone was even, but his eyes gave him away. They always did. I smiled back, trying to lighten the air. "You look like you've seen a ghost, doctor." He chuckled softly, forced, but polite. "Just one of those mornings." I nodded, though something inside me whispered that it wasn't just one of those mornings. He adjusted his glasses, opened my file, and then paused. That pause, it stretched too long, filled with everything unspoken. That's when he smiled, that nervous, uncertain smile that said more than words ever could, and I knew not exactly what I knew not yet. But I felt it in the pit of my stomach, like a cold hand brushing against the inside of my ribs. Something was wrong. He started talking, his voice gentle, professional, careful. I only half heard his words at first, something about results, markers, additional tests. My mind was running ahead of him, trying to fill in the blanks. When I finally focused, his tone softened even more. "I don't want you to worry just yet," he said, "but there are some things we should look at again." Those words, "don't worry," they never work, do they? When someone says them, your brain does the opposite. I stared at the floor tiles, tracing the tiny cracks between them. I could feel his eyes on me, waiting, giving me time. That's what I appreciated about him. He never rushed me, not even when the waiting room was full. "Okay," I finally said, though my voice didn't sound like mine. "What happens next?" He leaned forward slightly, folding his hands together on the desk. "I'd like you to come in for a more detailed scan. It's probably nothing serious, but it's best to be sure." "Probably nothing," I repeated, as if saying it twice could make it true. He nodded. "That's right." But he didn't smile again. Not that fake nervous smile. He just looked at me, steady, honest. That's when I realized he wasn't just being a doctor in that moment. He was being human. There was something deeply grounding in that. We talked for a few more minutes about the scan, the times, the preparations. But my thoughts were drifting in and out. I noticed how the light caught the faint silver in his hair, how his voice softened whenever he said my name, and how he kept his tone calm even when he was clearly worried himself. When I stood up to leave, I said, "You'll be there, right? For the next appointment?" He hesitated, just a second, then nodded. "Yes. I'll be there." That small promise meant more to me than anything else he'd said. As I walked out, the hallway seemed longer than usual. My steps echoed against the white floor, and I could feel something shift inside me, a quiet awareness that life, as I knew it, might change. But there was something else too, something almost comforting in the way he had looked at me, not with pity, but with understanding. I didn't know yet what the tests would say, or what I was supposed to prepare myself for. But I knew this: I wasn't alone. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea that had gone cold long before I took a sip. The air was cool, the sky streaked with pale stars, and I thought about that nervous smile again. About how sometimes people show you what they feel not through words, but through the smallest gestures, a hesitation, a sigh, a trembling corner of the mouth. Maybe, I thought, that's how care looks when it's scared. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying his expression in my mind, the tone of his voice when he said my name, the way he avoided my eyes for just a moment before finally meeting them again. There was something almost fragile in that exchange, something real, and though fear sat heavy on my chest, there was also a strange warmth underneath it. A quiet trust one couldn't quite explain. The next morning, I woke up early, before the sun rose. The house was still, and the air smelled like rain. I stood by the window and whispered to myself, "Whatever it is, I'll face it." But somewhere deep down, I already knew this wasn't just about the test results. It was about what that moment between us had stirred awake. Something that had been quiet in me for a long time, a reminder that connection, even in uncertainty, can change everything, and that nervous smile of his, it had started something I didn't see coming. Something I wasn't sure I was ready for, but maybe, just maybe, it was exactly what I needed. The day of the scan came faster than I expected. I tried to fill the days in between with work, small chores, and long walks, but no matter what I did, my thoughts always circled back to that moment in Dr. Allen's office, to that nervous smile that told me everything without saying a word. The waiting room was quieter than usual that morning. Maybe it was just me, but even the ticking clock on the wall sounded slower, heavier. I sat near the window, watching the rain trail down the glass. There's something strangely comforting about rain, how it makes the world softer, quieter. It matched my mood perfectly. When the nurse called my name, I stood, clutching my bag like it could somehow protect me. The hallways smelled faintly of disinfectant and something floral, maybe the cleaner they used. Every step echoed. The scan itself was uneventful: cold table, humming machine, the soft voice of the technician asking me to stay still. My mind was far away the whole time, replaying fragments of conversations, imagining different outcomes. Hope, fear, and curiosity tangled together in ways I couldn't untangle. When it was over, the nurse said Dr. Allen would review everything and call me in later that day. I nodded and smiled, but inside I was unraveling. By afternoon, I was back in the same small office. Same sterile air. Same faint coffee smell, and there he was sitting behind his desk, glasses slightly tilted, a paper file in front of him. But this time, when he looked up, his smile wasn't nervous. It was soft, calm, a little tired maybe, but real. "Sarah," he said, his voice steady. "I'm glad you came in." I tried to read his face before he spoke further, but he was careful this time. His expressions gave away little. Still, there was warmth in his eyes, and something else I couldn't quite name. He motioned for me to sit, and for a few seconds neither of us said anything. The rain outside tapped softly against the window, a steady rhythm between silences. Finally, he opened the folder. "The good news is, it's not as serious as we feared." The breath I didn't realize I was holding escaped in a shaky sigh. "So, I'm okay?" "You will be," he said with a small smile. "There's a condition we need to monitor. It's manageable with care, but you caught it early, and that's what matters most." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, not out of fear this time, but relief. I covered my mouth and laughed softly. "You had me scared for days." He leaned back slightly, his expression softening. "I'm sorry for that. I didn't want to worry you until we were sure." "It's all right," I said, brushing at my eyes. "I think I learned a lot this week. About patience. About fear. About what it means to be reminded that life is fragile." He nodded, and for a moment, the air between us shifted, not professional, not distant, but something more human. Something that felt like understanding without words. He hesitated before speaking again, his voice quieter now. "You handled all this with grace, Sarah. Most people panic." I smiled faintly. "You didn't see me at 2 a.m, talking to my ceiling." That made him laugh, a genuine laugh this time. The kind that made his shoulders relax. "Fair point." There was a pause, then he said softly, "You've been through a lot these past few years, haven't you?" I blinked, a little surprised. "What makes you say that?" He shrugged gently. "Just a sense. Sometimes it shows in the way people sit, or how they breathe when they're quiet. You seem like someone who's had to be strong for a long time." I didn't answer right away. I just looked down at my hands, then back at him. "Maybe. But sometimes I get tired of being strong." He nodded slowly, like he understood that sentence more deeply than most people would. "That's okay. You're allowed to be." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful, almost grounding. Outside, the rain had stopped, and faint sunlight spilled through the blinds, striping the floor with pale gold. As I stood to leave, he walked me to the door. It wasn't something doctors usually did, but I didn't question it. "It felt right, thank you," I said softly. "For being honest with me. For caring." He met my eyes, and there was something in his look that lingered a little too long, not unprofessional, but personal. "Real." "Always," he said simply. On the drive home, I kept thinking about that word, always. How casually he'd said it, Yet how deeply it sank into me. It wasn't a promise, not really. But it carried something warm, something steady. That evening, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window again. The world outside glowed faintly from the rain. I thought about life, about health, about how sometimes we need to be shaken a little to feel alive again, but mostly, I thought about Dr. Allen, about how small gestures can leave the biggest marks. The way he'd walked me to the door, the quiet tone of his voice, the steady kindness that never felt forced. It had been a long time since someone looked at me and really saw me, not as a patient, not as a stranger, but as a person. And that realization stayed with me long after the sky grew dark. It wasn't love. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was connection, the kind that reminds you that even in uncertain moments, someone cares enough to stand beside you. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in weeks because somehow, I knew I wasn't just healing from fear, I was remembering how to feel again. A few days later, I found myself walking through the small park near my neighborhood. The air was crisp, carrying that subtle hint of autumn, wet leaves, damp soil, and the faint tang of the approaching chill. I didn't have anywhere urgent to be, I just needed to move, to let my thoughts settle. After the weeks of worry and restless nights, I craved a rhythm outside the walls of my home, something that reminded me I was still part of a world moving forward. I wandered along the winding paths, watching children chase after one another and an elderly couple feeding pigeons near the fountain. There was a quiet familiarity in the scene, a comfort that felt almost tangible. I had taken this park for granted before, but now it seemed like a sanctuary, a place to breathe, to think, to remember that life went on even in the shadows of fear. And then, unexpectedly, I saw him. Dr. Allen. He was sitting on a bench under a tall oak, a newspaper folded loosely in his hands, eyes tracing the words but clearly lost in thought. For a moment, I froze, unsure if I should call out. Our interactions had always been professional, though colored with subtle understanding, but here, outside the clinic, the dynamic felt different, delicate, almost fragile. Sarah? His voice broke my hesitation before I could decide. It was quiet, not loud enough to draw attention, but clear and unmistakable. I smiled, a little nervously, and walked toward him. Hello. I didn't expect to see anyone from the clinic here. He chuckled softly, setting the newspaper down. Neither did I. It's a good day for a walk, though, isn't it? I nodded, sliding onto the bench beside him. There was enough space to respect boundaries, yet close enough that the shared presence felt warm, grounding. The leaves crunched beneath the occasional passerby's feet, the fountain gurgled faintly in the background, and the wind played softly with the strands of hair brushing my face. For a while, neither of us spoke. We just watched the park move around us, the ordinary life unfolding with quiet insistence. But even in silence, there was a conversation happening, subtle, unspoken, yet deeply present. Finally, he spoke. I wanted to ask, how have you been since your scan? I took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill my lungs. Better. Relief helped, at least a little. But it's strange, even when you know something isn't life-threatening, it shifts something inside you. You start noticing details, small things you ignored before. The light hitting the leaves, the way people smile, even the way someone can look at you with care. He looked at me then, really looked, with that steady kindness that had always unsettled me in a comforting way. I think that's a very human response. It's easy to overlook moments when life feels routine, but fear, it has a way of sharpening awareness, making you see what really matters. We spoke for hours, or at least it felt that long. We wandered along the paths, our conversation weaving through work, memories, and small personal revelations. He told me about his own quiet mornings at home, his love of old books and tea, and how he sometimes walked through the city to feel less confined by the clinic walls. I shared stories from my life, small victories, lingering regrets, the kind of anecdotes you usually keep to yourself until someone earns the right to hear them. And somewhere between the laughter and the reflective silences, I realized that connection wasn't always about words. It was about attention, about presence. About someone acknowledging your existence without judgment, simply because it mattered to them. He glanced at me at one point, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of his lips. You have a way of noticing things most people overlook, he said softly. I guess I've learned to, I admitted. The weeks of worry, the sleepless nights, they force you to pay attention to what's real. He nodded, his gaze holding mine longer than necessary. And what's real right now, Sarah? I thought about that, about the crisp air, the gentle light, the warmth of his presence beside me. This moment, I said finally. This exact moment feels important. He smiled then, a gentle, sincere smile. It is. That's why we notice it. The afternoon waned, sunlight slanting through the trees in long, golden beams. We eventually sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky deepen toward evening. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people sharing time in a way that felt simple yet profound. Before we parted, he said quietly, "I'm glad you're finding peace, Sarah. You deserve it. And I'm glad we can share these moments, even outside the clinic." I felt a warmth spread through me, not from anything dramatic, but from the quiet acknowledgement, the rare gift of someone recognizing your value without expectation, without demand. "I am too," I said. "I've needed this more than I realized." As I walked home later, the air crisp against my skin, I kept replaying his words, the gentle cadence of his voice, the softness in his eyes. There was something in our connection that went beyond the ordinary patient-doctor dynamic, something rooted in trust, in mutual understanding that I realized then that life sometimes gives you these moments unexpectedly, the moments that linger, that shape you, that remind you of what matters most. And sometimes, it takes fear, uncertainty, and shared humanity to open your eyes to them. That evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the sky darkening, and I allowed myself to reflect not just on the health scare, not just on Dr. Allen, but on the way small gestures, small moments of attention, can ripple through your life. I didn't know what the future held, not with my health, not with this new layer of understanding between us. But I knew that something important had begun, something quiet, fragile, and profoundly human. And that awareness was enough for now. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of life slowly returned to its familiar cadence. The initial tremor of fear had softened, replaced by a sense of quiet vigilance and gratitude. I still went to the clinic for follow-ups, still sat in that small room with its antiseptic smell and fluorescent lights, but now the visits carried less dread. There was a balance in knowing that I had caught a scare early, and that Dr. Allen's steady presence meant I was not facing it alone. One afternoon, I arrived for a routine check, and he greeted me with that gentle smile I had come to recognize, calm, professional, yet layered with an understated warmth that never failed to steady me. Sitting across from him, I realized how much our interactions had shifted over time. They were no longer just about tests or results. They were about understanding, about shared humanity, about quiet reassurance in the midst of life's unpredictability. "You've been walking more, haven't you?" he asked, as though noticing the faint glow of health in my cheeks. "I have," I admitted. "The park, mornings before work, it helps me think." "Good," he said, nodding. "Your mind and body both benefit. It's not just the exercise, it's the awareness, the mindfulness." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me at his words. "I've learned to notice more, Dr. Allen. Small moments, people's gestures, things I used to overlook." He looked at me with a depth of understanding that always caught me off guard. "That's important. Life is made up of small moments, Sarah. Sometimes they teach us more than the big events ever could." As we talked, I reflected on the weeks since my scan, the nervous smiles, the walks in the park, the conversations that had grown beyond the confines of the clinic. There was a thread running through all of it, a recognition of life's fragility and the strength found in connection. In that, I realized, I had grown. I had learned to be more patient with myself, to allow space for emotion without fear, to accept that vulnerability could coexist with resilience. After our discussion, he walked me to the door. This time, the gesture was no longer laden with the nervousness of our first encounters. It was steady, simple, natural, a reflection of the trust and understanding we had built together. "Take care, Sarah," he said softly. "And remember, it's okay to lean on the people who care about you." "I will," I replied, a gentle smile forming. "And thank you, for everything." Outside, the day had warmed, the sun filtering through clouds to create a patchwork of light on the sidewalk. I paused, breathing in the calm air, and felt an unspoken sense of closure and continuation all at once. The fear that had gripped me weeks before had transformed into something quieter but stronger, a profound awareness of life, of the people who make it meaningful, and of my own resilience. Walking home, I thought about Dr. Allen, about his patience, his honesty, his quiet presence. Not once had he forced comfort upon me. He had only offered it, sincerely and consistently, through words, gestures, and attention. And in doing so, he had shown me the power of care that doesn't demand, that doesn't rush, that simply exists. That evening, I sat by the window with a warm cup of tea, watching the last light of the day fade. The streets outside were quiet, and the world seemed to hold its breath for a moment. I allowed myself to reflect fully on fear, on relief, on connection, on growth. I realized that the nervous smile I had first noticed in his office had been the beginning of a lesson I would carry with me for years. That human connection, even in small, unassuming moments, can provide profound guidance and reassurance. I thought of the park, the quiet walks, the moments of laughter and silence, and how they had shaped me, strengthened me. I thought of the times I had felt fragile, unsure, and how, in those moments, someone's care, steady, honest, human, could illuminate a path forward. And I realized, finally, that life isn't just about surviving the scares or celebrating the milestones. It's about noticing, fully, the people, moments, and gestures that make the journey meaningful. It's about trust, understanding, and the subtle, enduring warmth that comes from being truly seen. As the night settled in, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. For health regained, for fears faced, for moments shared, and for the quiet, steady presence of someone who had reminded me how to live again, fully, attentively, and with an open heart. And in that reflection, I understood that the nervous smile I had first seen was never just about uncertainty. It was the spark of something larger, the beginning of a connection that had guided me toward clarity, strength, and quiet joy. For years to come, I would carry that memory with me, a reminder of how life's small gestures, offered with sincerity and care, can leave an imprint far deeper than words ever could. I realized, not just a memory of a doctor's smile, but a memory of the human heart, steady, compassionate, and profoundly present. And in that truth, I found a quiet, enduring peace.